Sometimes life takes you far from home, not just in distance, but in destiny. He was a quiet man, retired, looking for peace in the heart of South America. But what he found in the Amazon was something no map could ever lead him to. 3 women, 1 house, a hidden village untouched by time. They didn't speak his language, but their eyes said everything. And as the days passed in the heat and rhythm of the jungle, he became more than just a guest. He became a man reborn, a father, and maybe something far more dangerous. This is not just a story about passion. It's about tradition, survival, and the price of giving your heart to a place that doesn't let go. Hi, I'm Veronica. I've spent over 30 years creating stories that stir the heart and spark the imagination. Tonight, I'm inviting you into one of the most unforgettable ones. If you enjoy stories that take you far from the ordinary, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold tales from around the world. His name was Richard Monroe, a 63-year-old retired biologist from Oregon who had seen more labs than landscapes in his lifetime. He never married, never had children. Life had passed him by like a train he was never meant to board. After a mild heart attack and a string of lonely birthdays, Richard sold his house, packed up a single duffel bag, and booked a one-way ticket to South America. He told no one. Not his old colleagues, not his distant cousins, not even the neighbor's cat he used to feed. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to feel something again. Richard arrived in Colombia with no plan. He wandered through cities, small towns, coffee farms, and long stretches of jungle. And then, after nearly 2 months of travel, he found a guide. A wiry man named Miguel, who offered to take him deeper into the Amazon than most tourists dared go. Miguel spoke in riddles and warnings. This place, he said, is not just trees. It remembers things. It holds on to people. Richard didn't care. In fact, those words only pulled him in more. 3 days downriver, they arrived at a clearing. A wooden house sat on stilts, surrounded by thick palms and humming insects. 3 women stood in the shade watching him arrive. They were sisters, Miguel explained, raised in the jungle, born to a healer mother and a father who had disappeared into the forest years ago. They spoke little Spanish, no English, but their presence was magnetic. The eldest, Alma, looked at Richard with no smile, only steady eyes. The middle one, Luce, tilted her head and whispered something to her sister. And the youngest, Marisol, just stared. Not with shyness, but curiosity, like he was something rare. Miguel said goodbye that same evening, refusing to stay overnight. Richard was left with a plate of cassava, a cup of warm herbal tea, and silence. But that night, as frogs croaked and stars poured down through the treetops, he didn't feel alone. He felt watched. Not in fear, but in a way that made his skin feel alive. The next morning, they gave him work. Cutting bamboo, carrying water, fixing the roof after a storm. No words were exchanged, only nods and touches on the arm, guiding him. Days blurred into weeks. He stopped checking his phone. He forgot what day it was, but he remembered the sound of Marisol's laughter. He remembered how Luce braided her hair in the evenings, and how Alma, the eldest, always walked barefoot at dusk, humming a tune that made the birds go quiet. And one morning, after he'd fixed the chicken coop, Alma handed him a folded cloth. Inside was a carved wooden pendant. She hung it around his neck herself. In that moment, Richard realized he was no longer a visitor. The forest had taken him in, and the sisters too. One night the rain came hard. Sheets of water crashed on the tin roof, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Richard couldn't sleep. He stepped outside barefoot, letting the rain soak through his shirt. That's when he saw her Marisol standing under the overhang, her hair dripping, her white dress clinging to her skin. She didn't move when he approached. She just looked up at him and said a single word in a language he didn't know. Then she reached out and touched his chest, right where the wooden pendant lay. The next morning, Alma's mood had shifted. She no longer met his eyes. Luce stayed close to her younger sister, as if shielding her from something. Richard didn't understand what had changed, but he felt it. Something invisible had passed between them, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The days grew heavier. Richard began to feel something shifting, not in the trees or the sky, but in the way the sisters moved around him. Alma no longer greeted him in the morning. She would walk past him with her eyes fixed on the ground. Luz had grown colder, her laughter gone, replaced by quick glances and whispered words he couldn't understand. Only Marisol remained the same warm, eager, always the first to hand him food, the last to leave the fire at night. She began sitting closer. Her fingers would linger when she passed him tools or touched his arm to guide him toward a task. At first, Richard thought he was imagining it. But one night, as they sat by the fire and Luce and Alma had already gone to bed, Marisol leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a long kiss, just a touch. Soft, warm, intentional. Richard froze. She said nothing. Just smiled, rose, and disappeared into the darkness of the house. He didn't sleep that night. His heart raced, not with fear, but with the awful thrill of crossing a line. The next morning, Alma's face was like stone. She dropped a bundle of firewood at his feet without a word. Luz didn't come out of the house at all. Only Marisol appeared, calm and radiant, as if nothing had changed. She brought him water, sat beside him while he sharpened his machete. And that afternoon, while he was repairing a broken section of the fence, she returned alone and pressed a folded cloth into his hands. Inside was a dried flower and a string made of woven grass, a sign, a gift, a promise. Richard didn't know what to do. He felt both young and old, wanted and condemned. He spent that night outside listening to the jungle, trying to convince himself it was a dream. But it wasn't. The next morning he awoke to shouting. It was Alma. Her voice echoed across the trees. Luz stood behind her, arms crossed, face red. Marisol was inside the house. Richard stepped forward but was stopped by Alma's outstretched hand. She held something in her palm. The pendant, the one she had given him. It was broken in two. She dropped it at his feet, then turned and walked into the jungle. Miguel's words returned to him in a whisper. It holds on to people. He finally understood. This was not just a family. This was a system, a tradition, a ritual. And Richard had broken it. For the first time since his arrival, Richard felt fear. Not from the jungle, but from the silence that followed Alma's departure. No one spoke to him that day. Not even Marisol. He tried to help with the cooking. Luz turned her back. He offered to fix the door that had been creaking, no answer. The place that once embraced him now held him at arm's length. At sunset, the three sisters gathered around the fire without him. He watched from the edge of the clearing unnoticed, like a ghost. They were speaking quickly in low voices. Luz was crying. Marisol was gripping her hands. Alma remained still, her eyes locked on the flames. Richard realized then that there were rules. Unspoken, unwritten, but known by them all. He had violated something sacred, not just love but order. That night, he found the gate to the river path had been tied shut. No canoe, no torch. He was no longer a guest. He was being watched. The forest, once vibrant and alive, now felt like a cage. Even the insects seemed to chirp with warning. Richard began to count the days. Not with a calendar, but by the way the light changed on the trees. By how many times the rooster called at dawn. By the weight in his chest that grew heavier each morning. He had tried to talk to Marisol again. She smiled at him, but it was different now. Softer. Sadder. She no longer touched him. He asked for Miguel. No one answered. He left a note by the edge of the garden. It was gone the next day, but no one came. One night, Richard waited until everyone was asleep. He took the small flashlight he kept hidden beneath his cot and slipped out toward the river. The gate had been untied. The canoe was there. His heart thudded in his ears as he climbed in. He picked up the paddle and froze. Someone was already sitting in the front of the boat. Alma, her eyes glowing in the moonlight. She didn't say a word, just held out a small object. It was a stone, flat, smooth, painted in red symbols, and on it was a name Richard. She placed it at his feet, then stepped out of the boat and disappeared into the trees. Richard didn't leave that night. He didn't move at all. In the days that followed, things changed again. Luz began bringing him food. Alma allowed him to help in the garden. Marisol resumed her nightly walks near his cot, humming a soft melody in the dark. But the stone stayed by the door of his hut, always in the same spot. He never touched it, and no one else did either. One afternoon, while gathering wood deeper into the jungle, Richard found something buried under a rotted log. Bones, small, human. Next to it, another stone, another name. One he didn't recognize. His hands shook as he backed away. But when he returned to the clearing, the sisters were waiting. All three of them, smiling. They said nothing. But Alma reached forward and touched his chest again, right where the pendant had once been. Then she whispered a word, chosen. That night, Richard dreamed of fire, of chanting voices, of women in white dancing under a blood-red moon. He woke up drenched in sweat. The stone was gone. In its place, a new object. A bundle wrapped in palm leaves, still warm to the touch. Inside, he found a carved figurine with his face. He dropped it. It didn't break. The next morning, he demanded answers. He raised his voice. He begged. He threatened to leave. Alma said nothing. Luz only wept. And Marisol, sweet Marisol, stepped forward and whispered, "Don't fight it. The jungle already chose you." Richard ran. He ran blindly through the forest, stumbling over roots and tearing his skin on thorns. But no matter which path he took, he ended up back at the clearing. Every time. By the third time, the sisters didn't even look surprised. They welcomed him with food and silence. That night, they painted his face with red and white pigment. He didn't resist. Something inside him had given up. When the moon rose, he stood in the center of the fire circle. Surrounded. Marked. Bound. Not by ropes, but by something older. Older than language. Older than choice. Weeks passed. Then months. The rains came heavier. The heat settled into his bones like an old companion. Richard no longer asked questions. He worked. He ate. He slept. The forest accepted him. Or maybe it had simply swallowed him whole. The villagers came next. Faces he hadn't seen before. Men with wide eyes and painted skin. Women carrying babies' baskets and secrets. They greeted the sisters with respect, and him with reverence. They called him something he didn't understand, but he heard it often, always followed by bowed heads. One morning, Marisol placed his hand on her belly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. It was firm, alive, undeniable. His breath caught, not from fear, but from the stunning, crushing truth. He was not leaving, and now a part of him never would. Alma began preparing herbs. Luz carved something from wood every evening. Marisol smiled more often. They moved like they had done this before. Because they had. Richard understood now. He was not the first. And he wouldn't be the last. The stones. The names. The rituals. This was a cycle. A tradition of flesh and blood. Of offering and legacy. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a seed. Planted. Watered. Growing. The day the child was born, the rain stopped. The sky opened wide. Birds sang louder. The forest seemed to glow. They placed the child in his arms. Tiny. Warm. Eyes just like his. For a moment he cried, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like surrender. He looked up. The sisters stood in a line. 3 women. 1 life. All bound together. Richard smiled. A small, tired, knowing smile. That night they painted a new stone. The name etched in red. Not his, but the child's. The stone was placed by the river, beside all the others. And the current whispered it away. Not to forget, but to carry forward. Richard never returned to the outside world. But he lived, not in headlines or history books, but in roots, in blood, in the breath of the jungle. He was no longer Richard Monroe. He was something else now. Something timeless. Something chosen. Sometimes, at night, he would sit by the fire and hold the pendant Alma once gave him, the broken one, pieced back together with string and sap. It no longer symbolized who he was, but who he had become. The stars above felt closer here, not just because of the lack of buildings, but because he had become smaller, less man, more part of something vast and pulsing. He stopped thinking in English. He stopped dreaming of cities. His thoughts flowed like the river slow, winding, always returning to the same place. The jungle gave him a new name. He never spoke it aloud, but the children did. And when they laughed and ran into his arms, he felt no sadness, no longing. Only belonging. Only home. And the forest, in its eternal breath, whispered his name like it always knew him. Stories like Richard's remind us, home isn't always where we're born. Sometimes it's where we surrender, where the wild things remember our name. Thank you for listening tonight. I'm Veronica, and I'll be here again soon, with another story that just might change the way you breathe. If this journey stayed with you, subscribe and like to keep traveling with me to places maps don't show.